Hi there. Today we're going to do a survey assessment of a property in Borough Avenue in Radcliffe. It's an ex-local authority house built in the 1930s, but it's had a lot of modernization. So let's just get into it. And the first thing I'm going to do is just talk you through the estate agency pictures because that'll give you a sense of context, I guess, and you can see how it's all been done. So new windows and nice windows actually. And you can see here it's got its gated, it's got its gates, and it's got a nice garden which is well laid out, and virtual tour. So the property isn't especially big, but it's just nicely looked after. And broadly, I would say it was the best property in that little patch, i.e., all the properties are kind of the same, but this is the one that was done up the best in my view, or at least had the best externals. And we can see here, all very pleasant. So estate agency pictures are great, but often they hide lots of sins. And the reason we would do a survey, of course, is to see exactly what's going on. I've gone through this previously, and overall, I think it's shaped up quite well. There are no really nasty surprises or whatever, and I've marked out points of interest in yellow. So typically, if you're not familiar with surveys, what they tend to do is have a few key points, like they talk about the issues and this and that and the other. But a lot of this is essentially supporting text. So this would be copy and paste text, report should be etc., etc. So they don't write this out for this survey, but they have their critical points, and then they have a lot of supporting content, let's say. Now, quite a few things here marked in electricity, gas, oil, etc. Now, this is not because they are problematic, it's because they don't have certification, or he hasn't seen the certificates for various things like the installation condition report or the cavity wall insulation guarantee and so on. And so what he's doing is just covering his risk really by saying, uh, here's something you need to be aware of and you must check it. And it's really because he can't check whatever it is himself. Now, we have lots of things here which are in reasonable condition, nothing perfect. Uh, so, okay. Now, the big thing that he talks about is, in my view, is getting onto the roof and sorting out some pointing onto the ridge tiles and so on. And these items in themselves are not particularly expensive, but in reality they're a lot more than this. So getting onto the roof isn't just doing the pointing, i.e., putting cement on the ridge tiles to make sure they're secure. They include things like getting the tower, the scaffolding tower, which is like 350 quid a week, I think it is. And or it might be less. Actually, it's less than that, thinking about it. But basically, you got that, then you got getting a hold of the tradesperson, giving them enough work so it's worth their while, and so on and so forth. So here we have the mechanical ventilation. This is an interesting one. It's not that important as long as you leave the windows open. So anyway, let's get on because there's quite a lot to do here. Now, again, as I said, a lot of this is just extra wordage. And I'm not going to go through it all with you because probably bore you. But it's he says, it's pitched, traditional build, etc. So it's all straightforward in that respect. EPCD, whenever we do the assessment and the property the original assessment, we always look at EPC. and I expect that that can be improved massively. But we're not going to get into EPC right now. We're going to stick with the survey. And here we have some stuff about the local area and so on. Now, he's saying the chimney stacks are basically good and there was no vegetation and the pointing was good and so on. So far so good. But he can't get up there and check it, so therefore he will have a caveat with that. Also, the slates look good, and we would have checked this when we did the original assessment to make sure that there were no cracked slates, nothing was slipping off, and so on. And broadly, it all looks fine. His main concern is, for example, cement on the ridge tile, which is suffering a bit here, and some pointing that needs doing. It's a really simple job, but you got to get onto the roof, and you know there's health and safety, so you got to get the right scaffolding and so on. So in reality, a job that might take 2 hours maximum or an hour and a half maximum takes uh, a day and the scaffolding hire and so on. So he might say 200 quid. I say £1,500 once you've paid the contractor enough money to actually bother to turn up. I know it seems weird, but in places where there's a lot of competition for contracting, the way it works is that if you've got a property that needs bits and bobs, it's fine. But it really works well if you've got quite a lot of renovation work, and then they can get stuck in and just get on with it. But anyway, he says no real defects on the slate, which I'm really pleased about, and a lot of cast iron gutters. So this would be the downpipe, and I think these ones are more modern gutters with made of plastic, and they're okay too. Very important that gutters are in good condition, because once you have leaking gutters, then all sorts of trouble ensues, because basically you get damp in the house and so on. Now, he's then talking about the walls being cavity, and there's evidence of insulation in the external walls. Good, but he's talking about cavity wall ties being basically corroding, and that is an issue. The way I look at all of that, though, is if you have a property with a gable, and I'll just go on forward a little bit. Right, here are the cavity wall ties, and this was built in the 30s, so it was pre-zinc coating and so on. And so what would happen is that you put your insulation in, and then you get condensation, and then these things rot, and then the two walls are sort of there without real support. But in my experience with these things, the really risky stuff is where you have a gable end. And the reason that's nasty is because, here we go, here's a very good example, in fact. Now, oddly enough, this, how random is this? I'm going to send this to Joe, one of our favorite builders. How crazy is this? So the story here is that this property collapsed, the gable end collapsed, the wall ties failed, there was a storm, the whole thing came down, and it collapsed on a van. So that's pretty nasty, and there are lots of examples of this. So this is an issue, and one has to just be very careful with this. So these fellows, by the way, were and here's some pictures of this. So I'm going to send this to Joe, our builder, whose employee was in that van. He was very lucky not to get badly hurt, but the point is gable ends, cable wall ties, issues. So the thing with this property though is that it doesn't have a gable end as such. It's got a hipped roof. It doesn't have this structural vulnerability, let's say. And because it's a relatively small building in a square or rectangle, really, if the cable ties go, it's not really going to affect much because there aren't any huge slabs of wall. Everything is in a corner, as it were. You know that not everything, but the wall, basically, the wall is like a square, and structurally, that's a strong thing. So yeah, it might be an issue, but I would say unlikely. Anyway, I'm just highlighting the cable tie issue because you might think, oh no, it's terrible. But in general, it's not an issue. Um, Sometimes lenders do ask for cable tie surveys, but it's rare. And Gatehouse were the last people I came across who asked for a survey to be done. But again, we've had lots of Gatehouse mortgages be run through with clients, and that the only cable tie survey there was only one that I know of. Anyway, so right, all fine, and moving on. The So they talk about a previous wall tie failure. I don't really understand this, and I don't quite understand what they're looking at, unless they're suggesting that this little pin here was added because there was a wall tie issue. Maybe this was rebuilt and therefore they wanted to put another wall tie in. I don't really know. But in any case, I don't think it's a real issue. And damp proof course, great. And front elevation, etc. So the damp proof, the wall tie thing, as I say, reiterating, I'm not seeing it as a big problem. And I think if the surveyor did see it as a serious issue, they would flag it as a red and they would be very forthright about it. Windows are all looking okay. And they've got I think they've all got BS logos on them, which is good, British standards. And the only thing is the rear door wasn't in such good condition, so there's some issue there. And moving on. In the loft, they have this boarding, and I assume it's some sort of lightweight corrugated plastic sheeting or something. And we don't know what's underneath. So we don't know if, for example, the roof is new enough so that it's got lining. Generally, the way it works is that you've got slates or some sort of roofing material. Then you've got a substrate, which would be either felt, waterproof felt dipped in tar, or a waterproof breathable membrane. But in any event, what happens is if the roof goes, like a slate falls out or something like that, then the water comes through, then the underlayer basically catches the water and drains it out. Effectively, this thing is an underlayer, but we don't. I don't really know what's going on there, and we've got a lot of junk up there which needs to go as well. But it doesn't affect EPC. And he's saying it's possible that there's plaster and lath, but maybe there are, but I don't think so. And it's mostly plasterboard. So this is good. Now, plaster and lath, or lath and plaster, is essentially where you have strips of wood and then they're all there fixed onto joists, and then you squidge the plaster on, it squirts through the joins, and then you get this. So I'll just show you. And plaster. Lath and plaster, there we go. And it's this kind of idea here. So fine. The main point is most of it's gone or all of it's gone. And typically what you see is for older houses, they would have had a big renovation at some point in their history and they would have pulled out the lath and plaster, the old wiring, the whole lot, and then redone. And this seems to be what's going on here. So that's actually quite good. A couple of cracks, okay, not a big deal. But overall, I think the plasterwork and the roof, the ceilings and so on are good. Some damage to the kitchen, but nothing significant. And then we have main walls, cavity, fine, we know that. And internal stud, that's good. And everything was upright and looking reasonable. And then we have more pictures, damp meter, no real damp to speak of. Damp isn't even really highlighted in any way, so that's very good. Damp is one of those things where if you do have it, it's a real problem. And if you don't have it, you don't even think about it. It's funny like that. But anyway, the floors are decent and the levels are okay. And that's good. The next thing is we've got more damp testing. Chimney breast is intact. That's generally a good thing because they are generally structural and everything is intact. Lots of no damp, which is good. And we have the kitchen. That's a decent surface, by the way, just to say that's a premium surface. That's probably Corian, which is like a stone resin mix, and that's good. Nice setup here. It There's a deliberation here as to whether you replace the gas hob with an electric one. As a landlord, generally electric is better than gas. There is a hood cover, but I don't know if there's extraction for that. And the staircase is all building regs compliant, which is good. And in the bathroom, they talk about no mechanical extraction. In other words, there's no fan. You could fit one. It's possibly a good idea, but probably not that necessary. And the simple answer is you make sure that the window is left open, or at least partially open. Nice uh, bathroom shower separator. And moving on to the electricity, so he doesn't have any certificates for that, which is why he says it's 3. And the good thing is it's an RCD board, so no wiring needed. That should be safe and compliant. So what I mean by RCD is that you've got circuits around the house, and if something trips, one of these little things just pops down and you're good to go. You're not going to blow the place up because it trips out. And this consumer unit is reasonably modern, and so the wiring is also reasonably modern. And the reason I know that is because there's lots of these. And generally in more modern wiring systems, you have wiring circuits which are separate from each other. So in old houses, you might have 3 circuits: downstairs, upstairs, and maybe the kitchen. But in this, you can see so many more, and it's because you might have bedroom 1, bedroom 2, kitchen, living room, etc. And it just makes everything easier to work with so that if something fails, the whole house doesn't go out, as it were. And then we have gas, which all looks okay but needs certificates, and the boiler, which looks reasonably modern, which is good. And so he says no certificate, must be high level risk, but that's just covering risk for the surveyor. All right, and then we're on to the yard, which all looks very tidy and not much to say really. It's all very presentable, as we see. Nice to have the gates. I think that's a good touch. And carrying on. Okay. Nothing much more to say other than what have we got? So there are risks. Japanese knotweed is a bit of a risk, but it shouldn't be a problem. And asbestos and so on. So there are lots of risks, but that's really more about the surveyor telling you those risks as opposed to there being lots of asbestos and so on. All right, and the rest is just more general information. Overall, this place checks out pretty well. It's in decent condition. There are no real issues. The cavity wall tie thing, it's a possible issue, but it's unlikely to be an issue when financing. Beyond that, there's nothing. It's a really quite a clean property with no real problems. Anyway, thank you.